Howdy y'all, welcome to History by Phillips. I'm Mr. Phillips, and you're watching the American Revolution series. This is part 3 of 4. Last video we talked about the war continues. That's what the lesson was about. Two big things, really one. America was needing allies. When we talked about them last time, let me find my video. Remember, George Washington found themselves in Valley Forge. 20 miles away from Philadelphia. Remember, that was pretty much their Washington, D.C. back then. Their capital's been took out from under them. They're camped out in the snow. They're having to eat shoe leather. They're trying to stay under these little bushes. Some of them even got shoes to stay warm. They're in a bad spot. The continental, the hopes for America are about to collapse at this point. But luckily enough, Mr. von Steuben, guy from Prussia, comes over, helps train military, brings it from the ground up. Now, a lot of folks like to think, oh, he made the military more effective. I mean, he can make them better shooters, better fighters. He did introduce bayonet training, which was very key to help winning the war. But the big thing is logistics, supplies, soldiers cleaning themselves, because the biggest killer of soldiers wasn't bullets or knives, it was disease. He made sure soldiers were very hygienic, make sure food is cooked proper, make sure just simple things like that. You win a war on your stomach, not your feet. Or a soldier marches on his stomach, not his feet. So he's able to take care of the things like that. Also, you have Ben Franklin over there in Europe, America's celebrity at the time. He's wowing people, convincing people to help the Americans. France will end up accepting after the Americans win the Battle of Saratoga. They convinced them to join in for the American cause for liberty. Also, Spain and them starts helping us out. And Spain helps us out quite a bit because the British will have a blockade around America, so it's hard to get the supplies into the 13 colonies. We'll talk about that here in a moment. But we talked about Mr. von Steuben, but we also talked about, yes, this was an American Revolution, but still we have Americans, like women and slaves, who can't vote, can't own property. Even the African Americans, they're being treated harshly with chattel slavery, pretty much being treated like property instead of like human beings. But we'll talk about that as we talk about slavery throughout this survey of U.S. history. But yeah, was this really an American Revolution? Was this really for the ideas of liberty, freedom, safety, the pursuit of happiness, when you still subjugate over half your population, your country's population, to a lifestyle of this? Something to ponder about. We'll be trying to figure that out throughout this class as well. But today we're going to talk about fighting in the West. What do I mean by fighting in the West? Typically, it's going to be along the Appalachian Mountains. Get my maps going on here. Getting better with this stuff. It's going to be along the Appalachian Mountains for the most part, around Pennsylvania and New York. But also, there's going to be some fighting around in this area, around Kentucky, or modern-day Kentucky, Tennessee, the Ohio River Valley a little bit. We talked about the OverMountain Men, a little bit of Tennessee history today. But today we're going to talk about fighting in the West. 3 aspects about it. We're going to talk about the Indians, who they typically side with. We're going to talk about the Navy a little bit, the war at sea. Talk about how that's going. And we're going to talk about the South. And when I mean the South, I pretty much mean this, like pretty much from, you could say Virginia downward, from that area. With that being said, let's get started. So, the war's going on, or full swing into the war. Now, Indians, for the most part, yes, varies from tribe to tribe. They have their various reasons, motivations of who they side with, either the British or the Patriots. But typically, they would side with the British. In particular, it all comes back to the Proclamation of 1763. Now, I've been harping about this for a while now, but in case you don't remember, the Proclamation of 1763, when these 13 colonies was first being set up, when everybody's still lovey-dovey with each other, English-wise, the proclamation stated that they could not settle past the Appalachian Mountains, so pretty much they could not go west of this line. So the Indians like, well, if we side with the British, they'll probably enforce that, and they'll keep all the English colonists on this side of the Appalachians. It's not what they wanted originally, because remember in the French and Indian War they sided with France because they was wanting everybody gone, but they kind of had to take their losses, and so if the Patriots win, more than likely the Patriots are going to keep expanding all the way out into something called Manifest Destiny. We'll be talking about that here in a month or so. But if the British win, they'll probably stay here, localized. So that's what the Indians wanted. They usually try to stay there. A notable Indian leader to make note of is Joesph Bryant. Joesph Bryant, he is a Mohawk chief. Mohawk's a tribe. He's a Mohawk chief. He would harass the Patriots all along the New York, Pennsylvania area. It'd just be a thorn in the side. Raiding, just being disruptive to the Patriots, catch them off guard. But a lot of the fighting they did was considered dirty. Patriots were guilty of this too. There's something known as scalping that started going on. So essentially, the British, they would pay some Indians. It could be various tribes, not just Mohawks. It'd be Iroquois, Cherokee, Creek, Chickasaw, Oneidas, Wampanoag, you name it. But they would pay Indians for scalp. So all scalp would be is pretty much when a soldier dies, they would take the top layer of their skin off and they would buy it. And that's how they would make money. Indians would give the scalps to the British, so on and so forth. As a patriot, obviously this will infuriate you. This is only just going to make you want to fight even more. I'm not sure if Joesph Bryant actually participated in that act, but either way, fighting in the West will be brutal like this. It's not like how it was in New England, like be kind of open fields, almost like a gentleman's agreement to fight. No, this is just down and dirty fighting out in these areas. Let's move on to the war at sea. The war at sea. So basically, we know Britain has the best navy in the world, and nothing can stop them, right? Their plan during this war is pretty much set up a blockade. That's a word to make note of. All a blockade is pretty much they're going to set up their navy all along the coast of the colonies here. By doing so, they have effectively stopped any kind of trading from Europe to come through, from South America to come through. Pretty much cutting off their supplies, kind of like how Trump did with China not too long ago. We cut off trade supply, we cut off trade with them. That does means they cannot get supplies in. They're having to make everything on their own inside, which is very difficult when you're a brand new country having to start up anyways. Yes, there are some exceptions. People do smuggle all the time. You see it. And you folks are kind of familiar with moonshine. There's a way to get around the law. So they'll find some ways in and out, but it makes it very difficult, and you have to rely on smugglers to get your supplies like ammo, uniforms, stuff like that. Makes it very hard. It's very effective. The Patriots, on the other hand, they don't have an army. What they have is something called privateers, and all a privateer is a pirate that's getting paid by a government. That's all it is. So America's Navy is made up of a bunch of pirates. Now, that brings me to my next person. This loon right here. This loon. Now, I told you George Washington was a kind of a loon, making people cross the Nicey River and march a bunch of miles to go attack a city on Christmas. Well, this dude's just a different level of loony. This guy, John Paul Jones, he thought it'd be alright to take his merchant ship. That's what a lot of the boats the Patriots were using back then, a merchant ship. All that is a boat designed for trade. It's not made for war. So they take these merchant ships and they would jerry-rig a gun on it, or cannons, however they can do it, and there's their war boat. Well, this dude, just like a good old boy working on his truck, he works on his boat. He gets his boat rigged up, the Bohemian Richard, I do believe. And he comes across one of Britain's most famous warships called the Cerberus. They go at it. They're fighting. Not to mention, he goes toward England to fight them. He goes to the Hornet's Nest. He sails there to fight them. But anyways, he's fighting this one boat. Fighting all day. He's having to circle and maneuver all around him. All crazy. He's fighting all day. Cannons going everywhere. on his little ragtag boat taking on this British naval warship, best supplied, designed for war. The captain of the service of the British boat asks, "Hey, you ready to surrender?" After hours of fighting, John Paul Jones, he replies like, "I ain't begun to fight yet." They keep fighting. He keeps going. Eventually, he would win. When attrition, pretty much, he just wore them out. The service couldn't keep up. They just sat dead in the water, and he was able to finish it off. But it took hours. He would go on raiding all through England, all around through their shipping lanes. This dude's loony. American hero by far. I do believe he went on to work for the Russian Navy because he's just addicted to the sea. He just loves the open ocean, I do believe. But for America, during the American Revolution, this dude pretty much put a cannon on his business boat, went to England, took out one of the big warships there, and just harassed them throughout the entirety of the war. Look him up, interesting fellow, John Paul Jones. But let's move on. Speaking of which, let's talk about fighting in the South. That's going to be, let's get my maps back out here. Nope. This one, fighting in the South. So think of it like this area. This area right here. Fighting in the South. Now typically, let's get back to the map here. Let's get this map to be fine. So usually, think of it this way. Most of the fighting's been happening up here in New England, around Boston, the New Englands. Most of it's been down through there. The further south you went, the more loyalist support you had, meaning they supported the British government. So Britain's like, well, we can start bringing our troops in through this way and slowly flood in and come in and crush the New England colonies, put them back into submission. So they figured they'd come in this way. Well, they started making a lot of folks mad when a bunch of troops started coming in, because all these folks are just going to be left alone. But when they start attacking cities around them, that's when they get fired up. Especially the OverMountain Men. We'll talk about them in a second. But basically, a lot of fighting will take place in the South. Now, a lot of these Southerners, a lot of them fought in the French and Indian War. More people per capita. You're more likely to find a veteran of the French and Indian War in the South than you are up in New England, to say. They've lived on the frontier. I mean, they're frontiersmen. They're pretty much the Wild West before the Wild West was a thing. They're living on the West. Interesting book to check out is when Knoxville is called the West. Interesting read. But anyways, these guys are living the frontier. They're living the mountain life behind the trees and stuff. They adopt the Indian way of fighting. The Indian way. But English soldiers, they grew up, they're trained this proper way, meet on the field, kind of like a gentleman's agreement. The settlers, especially around the Tennessee, Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Virginia, all those areas, they got used to fighting Indians this way, behind the trees, using rocks, ambushes. It's called dirty fighting. Typically, you catch somebody off guard, hit them real quick, and run away before they have a chance to do anything about it. It's looked at as dirty, hit and run. You must also call it as guerrilla warfare. This will happen all throughout the South. Basically, Britain will make the Southerners mad, telling them, "Hey, stay out of our way, or we'll hurt you." It's just you can't tell that. You can't tell that to these folks. If they would just mind their own business, the Southerners would probably let them alone. But no. Once they threaten them, the Southerners are like, well, I'll fight you. So that's what's going on here in the South. They had a loyalist stronghold. All of a sudden, they just messed up and made everybody mad. Cowpens, Camden, good battles. But anyway, one notable group of Tennessee history is called the OverMountain Men. OverMountain Men from Watauga. A little known fact about them: they'd be the first people to attempt a constitution to separate from Britain, and also west of the Appalachian. But that's beside the point. These men, they're wanting to be independent. Or these communities. They're here in the Watauga, Tennessee, Cumberland Gap area. Won't be left alone. They join in on fighting down in the Piedmont area. Kings Mountain, I'm sure a lot of y'all might have heard that. They won Kings Mountain, the OverMountain Men, this militia. They're notable, like the Green Mountain Boys and the Minutemen up in New England. But the OverMountain Men are from pretty much this area, notable. George Washington said toward the end of the war, if he had to make a last stand, it would be with the OverMountain Men of Tennessee. These guys are just, they're like the cowboys of the time. I mean, they hunt, they fish, they farm, they can track, they can build. They did it all, especially communities. But yeah, this will be where the myth of mountain men start coming from. Anyway, they get done fighting, but all this fighting down here in the south with all these Southerners. The Piedmont, the OverMountain Men, by the way, is down here, South Carolina. We didn't really talk about cow pens in Camden. All that's down here. Basically, the Southerners whoop them. And what you need to make note of is General Cornwallis. General Cornwallis, we'll be talking about him here tomorrow. He's pretty much a big general for the British military. He was down here. He ends up having to force his way back up to Yorktown. In case you don't know where Yorktown is, or why Yorktown is important, that's where the British officially surrendered and the Americans officially win the war. But because of all this fighting in the south, Cornwallis has had to take all his troops and regather back up here into his quote-unquote stronghold. We'll talk about how that stronghold got turned into a trap and forced Britain to surrender. But three things from today. Fighting in the West is one. The Indians, they typically sided with the British because they wanted them to enforce their proclamation of 1763. Remember, that stated that no British colonists could go past the Appalachians. That's why Indians typically sided with the British. The war at sea, know that Britain's Navy is still powerful, blah, blah, blah. They have a blockade set up on the United States, keeping us from getting supplies from Europe and the Latin American countries. One noble, John Paul Jones, crazy loon, rigged up his boat, took on a British warship, destroyed it, just loony. In the war in the South, basically the British made the mistake of making these southern colonies angry when they was typically on their side. Basically, they treated them like New England colonies, violating their rights, no trial by jury, speedy trial, search and seizure, stuff like that. They started doing that a lot more in the southern colonies, made them mad, threatened them, made them mad. Everybody joined in on the fight, and made pretty much the British troops have to retreat toward Yorktown. And that's where we'll pick up tomorrow. Until next time, this has been History by Phillips. I'm Mr. Phillips. Everybody take care, stay safe, and hopefully see y'all on the study block later. Until then, peace.